Just before Al Franken went out to the Senate floor, when just about everyone knew he was about to resign, I said to a colleague here that, well, this will dominate the news for the next few hours, but by the next day, the pundits will be arguing over this question. If Al Franken and John Conyers resign within 24 hours, two prominent Democrats accused of sexual harassment and sexual misconduct, what about the Republicans? What about Roy Moore? Is there a double standard here? Well, didn't have to wait that long because Senator Franken, or soon to be former Senator Franken, took care of that in his remarks. He talked about how, shocked he was to hear these allegations against him, how he disputes some of them, how he tried to be a champion for women, how he's resigning but he's not giving up his voice. All the things that you might expect a lawmaker under fire to say. And then he said the irony is not lost on him that while he's leaving, a man who has bragged on tape, I should say, about his history of sexual assault, sits in the Oval Office, and a man who has repeatedly preyed on young girls campaigns for the Senate with the full support of his party. Well, Roy Moore doesn't have the full support of his party, but he certainly has the support of a good chunk of it and of the President of the United States. So Franken couldn't resist taking shots at Donald Trump and Roy Moore, and now I knew in that instant that that would just sort of speed up the process. So let's look at what happened to Franken, though, because we've spent a lot of time arguing about Moore, and with his election in Alabama coming up on Tuesday, we'll spend a lot more time talking about the 9 accusers, many of whom say that he either tried to date them or sexually accosted them when they were teenagers. Now, there's no question that the accusations against Franken, even if true, are of a much less serious nature, not to justify in any way the deplorable behavior, unwanted kissing, groping during photo ops, and so forth. But when the first woman came out, this is now about 5 or 6 weeks ago, Leanne Tweeden, now an LA radio host, and said that back in the early 2000s she was doing a USO show with then comedian Franken, and there was a skit, and he kissed her in an aggressive way, and she didn't want to. And then, of course, the groping photo, which we've all now seen, where she's sleeping on the plane and he's doing his thing. It was a humiliation. It was an embarrassment, but I didn't think then, most people didn't think then, most political and media commentators certainly didn't think then that Al Franken was going to lose his job over that. Okay, so then a couple more women came out and said he grabbed their butt during photo ops, and it was starting to look like a bit of a pattern, but again, kind of a far distance from the notion that the Minnesota Democrat would have to give up his job. But what happened is it built, and more accusers, and then Politico on Wednesday reported on a case of a former congressional aide, not identified, who said that Franken in 2006, before he was a senator, had tried to engage in unwanted kissing with her. And then that same day, there was a woman, another former congressional aide, she wrote a piece for The Atlantic, Tina Dupuy, saying he had, in a photo op, sort of grabbed and squeezed her waist. It was maybe the least offensive of some pretty offensive allegations, but the very eloquent way in which she wrote it. I think just the dam burst, and you had Kirsten Gillibrand, and soon you had almost all the female Democratic senators saying Al Franken must go. And then you had more than half the sitting Democratic senators saying Al Franken must go. And then you had Chuck Schumer having quiet conversations, Schumer who had been silent on the question of resignation, with Al Franken, and finally, obviously, helping to persuade him that it was time to resign. He had not only lost the support of most of his colleagues, but he had lost the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, which had called for him to step down. So obviously, Franken trying to salvage what he can of his reputation, give a more uplifting speech, greatest honor of his life, and he still values public service, and that's all fine. But we're in a very different environment now, where within 48 hours, John Conyers and Al Franken forced to resign over allegations that you have to think, particularly in Franken's case, a couple years ago, would have maybe gotten a slap on the wrist, a reprimand from the ethics committee, would have gotten a lot of bad press, probably would not have had to give up his job. So is there now a new standard? Does that affect Roy Moore? Does that affect other lawmakers or others who are accused of sexual harassment or sexual misconduct? They can't now say, yeah, but Al Franken's still there. Franken's gone. He drew the contrast, and this is going to be, I think, the next turn in the media debate. The Democrats have now a winning issue because they appear to have dealt with 2 of their own offenders, while Roy Moore, at the moment, still running strongly in Alabama for the United States Senate.